Hi, I'm Janine Purves, and I'm with Waverley Wealth. And our objective is to help every Canadian make better financial decisions today and tomorrow so that your relationship with money is smooth and everybody will be better off in the end. And today, I'm really thrilled to be here. I have a guest here today who is Emir Dickson. And Emir is a founding member of the Red Square team with Royal LePage. They are in the top 1% of all the agents in Canada. So congratulations, Emir, and your team. And she's been in real estate for over 13 years. So she is going to share with us some of the things that are really important to understand regarding first-time buyers and how do you get into the market. I mean, Emir, it's insane right now. I can't even imagine the pressure of trying to buy my first house in this market. How do you get started with these people?
Hi, Janine. Thanks so much for having me. It is an insane market right now, and I'm sure most first-time buyers find it fairly daunting to even think about getting in. I've read numerous articles that, they all think there's no way I'm ever even going to be able to afford my own home. I don't think that's true. I do think if you're ready to get started and you've started your professional careers, it's obviously something to keep in mind is your career will only get better and your income will increase over time. So, maybe if you stretch a little bit in the beginning, you'll certainly get to where you want to be as you further your climb up the real estate ladder. I would think the first place to start is, aside from even maybe establishing at that point who your real estate agent might be or whether you want the help of a real estate agent, is to speak to a mortgage specialist. And I know you've done one of these sessions with a mortgage specialist, and that's okay. It's just you want to establish a good relationship with, whether it's the bank, whether it's a broker, a mortgage broker, but you really need to know what your budget is, what amount you'd be pre-approved for. If you're buying a condo, you would need to understand what your maintenance fee maximum would be, because that all factors in along with your income and your ratios, what you'd be approved for. So it's so important because of the insanity. You're often not allowed to have the condition of finance. So you want to be really, really comfortable with your finances before you even start this process.
Okay. Yeah, I know that's a big thing that we talk about, making sure they're, I guess, pre-approved is a phrase, right? That would be.
Yeah, and having a copy of your pre-approval can go a long way in an offer situation. So if you're a seller and you've got a few offers in front of you, and then you've got this, lovely professional that says, well, here's my offer, and here's a copy of my pre-approval, so you can see that I'm well within my range of what I can afford here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even think about that, but that's an amazing tip. So what do you think are the most important factors that new home buyer needs to consider when they're just starting this journey?
Well, I think that we sort of have a Red Square team formula, and that formula is about, the number one part of it is the education of the market and the education of the area that you've chosen. So I will say this, real time, most first-time buyers are like, well, I could see myself living here, or I could see myself living here. And so that is really important to choose the area. Do your research, know where you want to be, and then obviously that's going to be affected by your budget, right? So I'm sure, everyone wants to live in High Park or overlooking High Park, and that's probably not the budget reality for a lot of first-time buyers. So, that's just an example of a neighborhood, but for, in every little city, town, whatnot, there's communities that are perhaps more sought after than others. So you need to establish whether is that where you want to be. And then if it is something that you can see, you need to start getting educated. So my biggest thing with buyers, our team's biggest thing with buyers, is getting them out, getting them to see as many places as possible, getting them to sort of look at all the sales data and compare, do a proper comparison of properties. Well, this one sold for this, so this will likely go close to that, but this has no parking, so it, you know, it should be less than that. And then, it's that education really, you know, a place can come out on the market. It's not necessarily going to sell for the list price. It's going to sell, you know, in this competitive market that we're in, probably for something more than that. And a lot of times it can be.
It was unheard of years ago, right?
Right. And now it can be significantly more than the list price. So you really need to start the education on, you know, the financials and the education on the area and physically seeing the property. It's one thing to look at a bunch of photos and think you can see what it will go for. It's another thing to physically be there. See how high that ceiling was, see, you know, if there's certain factors like the level of finishes, they might look great in a photograph. And then you might get there and realize, oh, it's actually pretty shoddy work. It's not been done really well. Or, you know, you'll start to question, is this a flip? Is this something somebody did? So it's all part of the education. And I do believe that is, that's the biggest part of it. So, and I would say this too, don't be discouraged by what you start to see the prices sell for, or if it starts to go out of your budget. I think we just adjust the budget. We just change a few things, tweak an area, go to the outskirt of that area. That's how we sort of start to map out where you want to be.
Okay. I take it that means you're not discouraging people from buying at this point.
I'm not, and I've actually quite recently worked with some first-time home buyers, and in their case, they were looking at the condominium market because that's the way in for a lot of buyers right now. Like that's still, you know, how you're getting into real estate in the city of Toronto proper for under $1 million, right? Otherwise, you know, most of, I forget what the new stat is for this month, but it's been, you know, the relative price of a detached home is upwards of 1.5 on average now. So wow. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for sure. So tell me, when you think about the actual agreement and contract, are there some factors buyers really need to be aware of?
Absolutely. So when you're ready, you've seen enough, you've been through everything, you feel like you're really well educated, and then you find this wonderful place and you're ready to put an offer on it. This is when you really want to have an agent to help you through this process, to work with you, to map through this agreement, and so that you understand all the terms and the contract you are getting into. The biggest, sometimes buyers don't realize too, they need a deposit with an offer. So the deposit is an important part of the offer. It speaks to what it's called consideration, which is one of the big factors of a contract. In the old days, it used to be a handshake and yes, and that was your consideration. Now it's like, here's $100,000 and that is with my offer, and it's a deposit that goes towards the purchase price. It's not your entire down payment, but it is a significant amount. It's usually 5% of the purchase price. So depending on what you're buying, of course, and you know, maybe somewhere between 40 and 60,000 might be something that actually is more reasonable depending on the price point the buyer is looking in. But you need to have that and access to that money in order to make your offer. So if you've made your offer, if you're competing, I would highly recommend it be with the offer. If you're not, you can have 24 hours to produce it. But it's held by the listing brokerage in the case, depending on what you're purchasing. It's held by the listing brokerage in trust until the closing of the sale, and then it goes towards the purchase price. So that's it's a big factor to consider. And then you have to think about your purchase price. It's not always the list price. In some cases, it can be significantly over. So you need to trust with the agent you're working with that you've seen enough comparables, you've seen sales that would put the purchase price in the range you're thinking about, because you need the place, in most times, you need it to appraise as well. So it's a big factor to think about as you're doing an offer. if everything's sold for, let's say, 800,000, you don't want to make an offer for 1.1 because it probably won't appraise at that value.
So
Even
when
if
you
it's
say that, does that mean they can't get a mortgage enough? Like that difference, you can't get a mortgage for that extra 300,000 if the bank doesn't think it's really worth it?
No, that's your buyer responsibility to then bridge that gap, because the bank will loan you up to about 80% of your like loan to value ratio. Okay. So if you're pre-approved for the amount, that's great, but you still need to make sure the property is worth that amount. So
okay, right.
And it's not that
so
the bank
important, and if they get caught up with this bidding process,
well,
I guess
then
that you're the
emotionally
same person in the room. Is that how I would approach it with the
That's right.
the
That's right. Your agent needs to, you know, unless you have a lot of money down, like, you know, far beyond that typical 20%. And it's certainly if you're a first time buyer and you're a higher ratio mortgage and which means you're less than 20% down, you really need to understand if the property is going to appraise or not, because it sounds like your budget constraints might mean that it's really very, very important for you. Some people, you know, if this is their second or third home and they've got a ton of equity in their current home, you know, as second, third time buyers would have, they may have something more like 50% down. So their appraised value isn't as important as a first time buyer's.
Okay. Okay. So when you say appraise, it's like whatever the bank or whoever is assessing that value, what they say it's worth. And exactly. Then all the numbers fall under that
exactly
appropriate value. Okay.
Recently, the first time buyer that I just worked with, I actually really couldn't justify the price of the unit he was looking at. And I think it was slightly overpriced, but he wanted it. So we actually ran the full approval through with the mortgage person to make sure it would appraise prior to us even making an offer, because we really needed to understand if this was something that would work out for him or not. And I wasn't concerned to the tune of hundreds of thousands. I was concerned over about 30,000, whether it wouldn't appraise. And in that case, I think the bank they usually are fine if it's a, you know, not a terrible, but if you're getting to the max of your budget, you really need to, these are factors you need to consider.
Okay.
The other thing I think you need to consider too is conditions in your offer. Under normal circumstances, if you're buying a home, you really need to think about making sure you've got a home inspection to read through. Sometimes the seller will produce that up front. They'll do, you know, a full home inspection done by a reputable company. And that's what you want to understand exactly what you're getting into. You know, in the past, we would be able to buy a home conditional on a home inspection, and then you could do it after you've made your offer. Doesn't usually happen now with competition. So
isn't that insane?
Yeah.
And there's so many things that can happen.
Absolutely. And the reason I mentioned the financing and being comfortable with financing early in this conversation was because you don't always get the chance to go in conditional on financing. I know every mortgage broker in the world out there wants you to make your offer conditional on financing. It's just not the reality of the market right now. So okay.
Maybe one day we'll be back to a little bit more of a balanced market.
Right.
The buyer will have some little opportunities to negotiate in that regard.
Right.
Okay. Any other things on the contract that are important to be aware of?
The other, like, I mean, obviously closing date is another big part of it there. And other than conditions, we often will make representations and warranties within it so that the seller will represent and warrant a few things, like that it's not, that the appliances, fixtures, things like that you've asked for to be included will be in good working order when you arrive. If there's a swimming pool, wouldn't that be nice? If there's a pool, we ask for things like, you know, to make sure they close it properly for the season, or, you know, that when it opens, that they're still on the hook for some representations and warranties for that pool. Let's say you bought throughout the winter. What else can I tell you? We always ask for a survey. There isn't always a survey available depending on depending on the home, sometimes the sellers just don't have it any longer.
And what is the point of a survey?
Just like it in the end to, so that you've got something that represents your lot lines and whatnot. Like we've always asked for them to include the location of fences and that's actually not a reality, because often someone will have a survey of subdivision and it's really just lot lines. And then any disclosures of easements and things like that. So often there's utility easements on properties, or in the city of Toronto, a lot of driveways are mutual. They're not private driveways. So there's rights of way in that case from one neighbor to the next. So you just need to understand what those things are, and they're often, stated in the survey and in the land description. So.
Right. Okay. So with this whole really competitive market right now, what are things that you're recommending in the home buying process to your first-time buyers?
Okay. So a couple of things. Being really educated is number one, so that you're not making gross offers that are over and above what should be the market value of a property. Like the reality is you have to overpay a little bit to get the house, otherwise you're not winning. But we don't want you to overpay too much, is sort of it. So we want you to be educated on what you're going after. The other thing I would say is have that deposit ready to go. So if it's $60,000 or $50,000, whatever the case may be, it needs to be in your bank account. It can't be wrapped up in a mutual fund. So
as an advisor, I can tell you, I've had people call me and they need it in 24 hours. Like, I can't, that's impossible. Like, why didn't you tell me a week ago you were going to this?
Right, exactly. So, have your money ready.
Yes.
For that deposit. You don't need your whole down payment ready, because it's probably a 30-day close or a 60-day close. You've got some time to sell off that. But if you need your money from your RRSPs, you need to get it sooner than later, so that you've got access to it. Because if we're going to make an offer, I want you to have that check. So that's the other thing, is I'm going to get you, every time you do an offer, to go to the bank and get a bank draft written to that listing brokerage, so that it's in my hand with our offer that we make. That gives you the competitive edge over anyone who thought, I'll go get it tomorrow if they accept my offer.
Right.
That's the one. And the other thing is being firm. It's actually the only way you're going to get what you're looking for right now is making a firm offer, unless we're in some rarely found amazing condition where the property's been sitting long enough that we're actually maybe in the driver's seat as buyers. It doesn't happen very often, but if we ever are, we can go in conditional on finance. I've seen it enough. And we can go in conditional on a home inspection and whatnot, which is lovely if you can have those things. But if you're competing and it's a hot property that's presenting really well and it's staged and it's lovely and everyone wants it, you need to be confident enough in your finances to not have a condition of finance, and you need to be confident in the state of the home. So what we recommend is, if there is no home inspection, that we do one ahead of the offer date that we're putting. So let's say a property was holding back offers till next week on Monday at 7 p.m. Well, we get there as quickly as possible, and we'll line up a home inspection sometime during that week, so that you can go there with a home inspector, look at the house, make sure you're confident going in, and then you're set up properly for the Monday night offer night. So you can remove those as conditions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess let's assume somebody has put in an offer, maybe a little higher than they hoped, but they're there, it's accepted. What are the things that they have to consider now that sale's accepted?
So once it's all, celebrations, everybody's happy, and, you've gotten your,
maybe a little shock factor for what they spent.
Yeah, exactly. And, hopefully no buyer's remorse.
Hopefully.
But the one thing we always write into offers is access visits. So what those are visits that you get to go back to the property before closing, and have a, measure. And so in some cases you might want to bring in a contractor or to get quotes and things like that. So we set that all up for you. As agents, we have to be there and be present for those. Depending on the length of the closing, we'd ask for maybe 2 or 3, but we're with you the whole way so that you've made your offer, it's done. We also will help you get all the information that's needed to the lawyers, because you do need a lawyer still in the transaction, and to make sure we get it all to your financial lender, right? So they need a copy of the agreements, any notices of fulfillment for conditions. They're going to need a copy of the deposit receipts, and in most cases they're going to need our version, the broker version of the MLS listing, so that they can proceed and get things going. So, and we also help out with appraisals and getting, because your lender, even though you've been pre-approved, but you've put in this condition, you haven't put in a condition of finance, but you're still getting financing. So often the lenders will send in an appraiser to go through the home and make sure, that it appraises and whatnot. And then just on our team, and I'm sure other agents, we talk a bit about the closing costs involved, and we educate on that in the beginning of this whole process, but that's something to keep in mind. And we have checklists for changing your address and all the things you need to think about, and then we'll help you organize movers. With our team, we provide boxes and packing materials and all kinds of things to help you get started with your move. And to carry on. The one thing we haven't touched on, Janine, and I don't know if the mortgage person in your other session did, was land transfer tax. It's actually a big factor, and
especially in Toronto,
because it's double. Do you get rebates as a first-time buyer? They used to be $3,750, and I think it's up to $4,000 now from the municipal and the provincial. So that's an $8,000 savings on land transfer tax. But if you're buying a $600,000 property, your land transfer tax is about $18,000 in the city of Toronto. So you still owe $10,000 at closing for land transfer tax. So it's funny because not everybody, like, when it first came in Toronto too, I found it really hard because it wasn't a factor that anyone of the professionals in the industry assumed it was their responsibility to discuss and talk about. Like the mortgage person almost was like, well, that's different. That's separate from them. It has nothing to do with getting your mortgage. It doesn't, it's
an expense. It's an expense.
It's massive. So, and and even the lawyers, really the lawyer's the one who tells you how much it is when you go. But if you don't know about it before you get there, you can get caught out. So it's a really big factor that we really hope every first-time buyer, although they qualify for some rebates, frankly, the price of homes aren't rebating them very much anymore based on the value of these homes. It used to be around $400,000 that the land transfer tax would be almost nil for a first-time buyer.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah. So that was a while ago, and nothing is really sold. I bought my first property for that in 2004. But that's the last time that's happened. So anyway, it's just something to think about as you.
Okay. So with the market now, one of the questions I'm getting from my clients is, but it's so high, we're waiting for a pullback. And I know many people have been thinking we'd see a pullback for years, and maybe we've seen a little bit of slowing, but we really haven't seen much of a pullback, right? And the issue is, like, what do you tell people when they say that?
I haven't seen any kind of downturn in this market, like aside from maybe a plateau in 2008 and maybe a small one in 2017. I haven't seen anything. Like anyone who bought in 2004 and beyond they've been in a seller's market, while they've been purchasing from that basically since the early 2000s. It hasn't changed. So my advice is, if you can afford to do it now, I actually think if you're there's no point in even waiting till you can afford a bit more down, because the prices are up so much by the time you've earned or saved more money. Like
down payment, like it just kind of
right, it just keeps going up. So the reality is if you can get in the market, just get in and build your equity and live your life. That's how I think. I don't think there's, I mean, I'm sure that sounds, coming from a realtor that, of course that's the way we'd love everybody to think, but I don't see it changing. So if you can afford the down payment and you can afford the monthly payments, then just get in and make your payments and live your life. That's actually.
I guess the issue is too, because we never know what's going to happen. It's very likely there will be a pullback at some point, but what if it's 8 yeyears from now, right?
And you've lost all that equity in 8 years that you could have been building.
Yeah. And the thing is, what I always tell people is they don't know the price of their house on any given day. They know the price of the house down the street. Maybe your house wouldn't sell today. I know that sounds crazy in this market, but we don't know and we don't see the value. So sometimes with real estate, we are more logical with money, with our own home and our real estate, than we are with other things. Because when you can see the value every instant, sometimes you don't make good decisions. So honestly, what I really try to tell people is when they're looking at this is go back and crunch the numbers, figure out if this is going to work for you. And if it's not, okay, you need to be realistic, which is what you said at the beginning. But you also need to indicate that there's opportunity, and you can't just be kicking yourself because every time you turn around, there's something that's changed. If you're in your house and you're happy and you're able to pay your mortgage, then don't worry about what the cost is, other than if there's some major issues, you lose your job, but then you need to have those buffers built in. And as a financial planner, that's part of what I try to reinforce. So.
Absolutely.
All right. Did you want to leave any final comments, Emir?
Final comments. Well, I mean, I think I just said them. Like, really, real estate has never been a bad decision for people to make from a financial and investment point of view. And if you can get in to this market as a young buyer or as a first-time buyer, I think it's important you do it as soon as you can. And I wish I'd done it years sooner than when I did it. So if I could go back and tell my first-time buyer self, I'd say I should have bought instead of rented when I lived with my roommate back when I was 25. We should have bought a place together and lived in it for the 3 years we wasted on rent, and we would have been worth so much more beyond, when we decided to sell. So,
okay. Well, I want to say thank you for your time today. You've given some great tips. I know that you guys have a first-time home buyers package with tips, right? So we're going to be able to share that link on the Waverley Wealth website. That's Waverley Wealth, ley.ca. And then your information, Emir, if anybody wants to reach out to you with questions or whatever, you'd be happy to speak with them, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.
Okay. Thanks.